Okay, good. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. There'll be, I'm sure, more kind of trickling in as we go, as usually happens. And for those of you that couldn't make it tonight for whatever reason, I get lots of responses on that as well. Yes, we are recording, and I will be putting these out on the interwebs for others to digest at a later time. I recorded the last one, and that was the first one that I recorded and we have available. So for those of you that missed that, that was a bit of a discussion on AI tools in Lightroom, and which, of course, as anything AI does nowadays, quickly tangent off or branch off into we're all going to die soon in the fires of AI technology. Um, but it was a fun conversation nonetheless, regardless of what I'm saying here. Eric was joined us last week, and then I put him on the spot to join this evening as well and talk about, as Eric loves to go on and on about, as do I, considering I run my own fine art print lab here, printing. So the title of this evening's talk is The Perfect Print. So you got a lot of weight on your shoulders here, Eric, when trying to talk about the perfect print. But before that, I wanted to give a few announcements, take care of a little business before we get going here, and that is, for those of you that are aware that I have a print lab, and well, I guess for those of you that aren't, I do. And I have a new website that was just launched this week. Finally, it was months in the making, and I'm really proud to say that last week, actually, we just launched our new website, which offers a lot more services than we had done previously. The last one was very crude, and this one is much nicer. We licensed rows, so the checkout process is much easier, and you can do multiple images at a time. If those of you have used rows before, know what I'm talking about. You can crop things and rotate things and drag and drop things into clusters, and we are offering exposure prints now. We're offering framing options. We expanded our line of papers. We now have an economy line of papers along with the fine art line of papers. And the fine art papers are a broader selection of the Hannah Mule papers. And we have canvases, as we did before, but are putting those in floater frames for you if needed. And also ordering floater frame options for our metal panels. And for those of you that haven't worked with me before, you've heard metal panels lots in this world of photography in which we live. But my metals are different. We do not do dye sublimation printing with our metals. I have a bit of a hack because dye sublimation, although nice and stuff, I'm not a huge fan of it. So we have a hack to where we get to print on metal using our aqueous ink printers, the much larger ink set, which gives us a bigger gamut to work with. And we're not transferring the image from one medium to another by way of heat. So there's no gas exchange, which often gives a bit of a loss of detail. So our metals are a bit different. Ultimately, we have a new website. So check it out, bradleyprintservices.com. I want to know if you like it. What should we do differently? How should we fine tune it, if anything? But anyway, in your spare time, check out all of the new services we have available there. In addition, I want to tell everybody about some upcoming stuff that we have. For those that are local or those that are kind of nearby that can make it to the area, that area being the Monterey Peninsula, specifically Pacific Grove, California, which is that small little town that people know about a little bit less than, say, Pebble Beach or Carmel or Monterey. But we're sandwiched in between Pebble Beach and Monterey. And here at the studio, we're going to have a guy named Craig Lovell, who made a documentary film about Jerry Olsman, coming in on August 25th, Friday, August 25th, to screen that film. And we're going to have Ted Orland come and introduce Craig and talk a little bit about, well, that era of photography to some degree as he's kicking off Craig and the documentary film. For those of you who do not know who Ted is, Ted used to teach at Ansel Adams workshops. He started as taking some of Ansel's workshops and then ended up teaching at a lot of Ansel's workshops. In addition to co-authoring a very popular book called Art and Fear that he co-wrote with a guy named David Bales. David coincidentally wrote the foreword for my book on Lightroom that I published with Focal Press a few years back. But Art and Fear, if you haven't read it, is one of the best books that I've read on the trials and tribulations and stuff that all of us artists, it's not just geared toward photographers, that all of us artists face at one time or another in our careers, in terms of trying to find our muse and be productive and be creative and all that stuff. So Ted will be here introducing Craig again on Friday, August 25th. For those of you that are divers, we have a few spots left available for our Channel Islands expedition out of Ventura, California, doing some underwater photography, and that's September 18th, 19th, and 20th. I'm skipping over. We have a photo walk led by me and Joe Placco, and that's going to be in Monterey Harbor and on the wharf. So we're going to meet early in the morning on Saturday and just take pictures for several hours as a group. We're there to help as needed. And then beyond that, I'll just mention a few things that are going to be on the calendar soon. All those things that I mentioned, by the way, are on the website. You can reference those again, bradleyprintservices.com, see when the dates are, sign up for the things you can sign up for. And then about to go on the website probably next week, we have some group whale watching coming for Monterey. We have a pontoon boat that I've chartered. It's going to allow us to go up into the Elkhorn Slough to do some wildlife photography, focusing on sea otters, harbor seals, birds, etc. And a Lightroom developing workshop in the works as well, which will be a full day, if not even a day and a half, coming soon. So that's the upcoming stuff. That said, we are here today again to talk about the perfect print. Now, of course, there's no such thing. Let's start by saying that. And I say there's no such thing in terms of, what makes a good print is absolutely in the eye of a thing that's in the eye of the beholder, in my humble opinion. What one person is going to think is an amazing photograph, an amazing print, is not necessarily what somebody else is going to think. And of course, people have different, ideas on color and palette and textures and this and that and papers. And then there's glossy papers and semi-gloss papers and textured papers and smooth papers. And so what I really mean by perfect is not so much all that other stuff in terms of style and even really technique as much as it is getting something off of that printer that we as individuals, that we've already maybe determined looking at something in Lightroom that we are connecting with, that we like, that we see has gotten to the point where it's worthy of our time to hit that print button, hit that P button, so it comes out on our printer and we can hold it up and treat it with the kind of care that it deserves. Well, the perfect print in that context, in my opinion, is something that just looks like what you see on the screen. We don't want to get something that comes out of our printer looking completely different. We don't want to get something that we send off to me or any other lab that looks completely different. We want to be surprised or shocked with what's coming out. We want what's coming out to look like what we want it to look like. And in that context, the perfect print is consistency. Consistency. And that is a very challenging thing in a lot of ways with modern workflows. Early on in my career and learning how to print, I found it terribly confusing, and learning a whole, when I thought I was wrapping my head around photography and I got what apertures and depth of fields and shutter speeds and all that stuff was, and I thought I had my footing. Well, then I started to try and print this stuff, and I realized this is a whole other nightmarish realm of stuff I have to learn that delves into color sciences and ICC color management and all of this stuff. So a lot to deal with. But one of the terms that I use there, which is a very critical one to know, is ICC color management. And that's a very important one to wrap our heads around to gain that kind of consistency. So bearing that in mind, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. Oh, and of course I don't have Lightroom open. How well prepared am I? So give me a second. And let's pick an image here. It doesn't matter what we're picking here. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick, and I mean quick, kind of walkthrough of the print module in Lightroom. Now, you can print through Lightroom, you can print through Photoshop, you can print through other programs. If you're really fancy, you might print through something referred to as a RIP, raster image processor. A lot of labs like myself, even though I don't use one anymore, use RIPs to print their images or print lots of images. RIPs are helpful for doing gang runs. You have 20 orders you want to print at once. RIPs are great for doing that kind of thing, but there's other uses for them. But Lightroom is a perfectly appropriate thing to print through. I actually, at the print lab, believe it or not, print a lot just through Lightroom, especially when I get raw file submissions from clients. I print directly through Lightroom because it works great. It works great. It works fine. If you're a Photoshop printer, one of the first things you'll notice going into Lightroom is that the options are more limited. But there's reasons for that. I won't go in depth into what all those reasons are, but for the most part, what we photographers use when dealing with all of those options that I say are more elaborate in Photoshop are more limited in Lightroom because that's typically what photographers just use. Okay. That's basically it. But anyway, I digress. Quick walkthrough of the print panel print module in Lightroom. Like any module in Lightroom, as I talk about with all of these discussions on this program, the user interface is the same. Viewing window in the middle, panel on the left, panel in the right, panel on the left, always reserved for navigational stuff, and panel on the right, always, column on the left, reserved for navigational stuff, and column on the right, reserved for the details. In this case, what do I mean by navigational stuff? Well, we can navigate through templates that are given to us by Adobe. 4x6. Now, if you look here at the viewing window in the upper left, we'll get previews of them. 1 4x6, 4x6, and 6 2x3s, and go on down the line, and you can see all these configurations of different prints that are possible here with these Adobe supplied user presets. Beyond that, we have a possibility of creating our own user presets. So meaning that I can create templates here, which consist of, I want to do a sheet that's just wallet size, or I want to do a sheet that's a bunch of 5x7s, or a sheet that's, think of any configuration that might fit your printing lifestyle. That can be created, laid out here first, and then come over here, hit the plus button, and then you can save that configuration there and refer to it at any point later on. And you can create as many user presets as you like. Okay. Beyond that, the only other thing that's available for you to navigate through are the collections. Like collections are available to you in any module. The only difference here when you're doing a collection from the print module is if I do one of those things that I just mentioned in terms of creating a template or a configuration of different cells within this viewing window, is I can then come here and click on save that as a collection, or in this case, create a print. And then that is saved also in our collections panel as well, which will allow me to refer to it later, not just as a blank template where I can dump other images into a time over and over and over again, but as a collection, it's going to save that configuration as that template with that specific image that I happen to be printing with right now. So that's the big difference with those. Okay. So that's what we can navigate through in the print module. And then what I mean by details here, we have the option of doing a single image contact sheet, a picture package, or custom package. Those are different layout styles. Mainly what I do, because I'm just kind of dragging and dropping random images on this canvas here before I hitting print, is I use custom. Because what custom allows me to do is just jumping past these two image settings and rollers, grids, and guides panels and going into cells, as I get to then kind of futz with this in any sort of way I want. Put one image in or put 10 images in of different sizes. Work with it a bit like of a rip. As I mentioned, a rip is is something that a lot of labs use, where if I get 20 customers that want to point 20 different images of different sizes and at once, I can run them all on a canvas and configure them all in a particular way, hit print, and it just all prints out on a roll. I could do that in Lightroom here as well. It doesn't quite work as well as a rip. It's one of the downsides of it. I won't go into what the differences are, but I can do that kind of a thing here. So I can get rid of that, and in cells I can add an 8x10 and then a 4x6 and then another 5x7 and then another one, and I can start to arrange these different cells, which I can drop images to in all sorts of different ways. And then I can expand them manually here by using these height and width sliders. I can rotate the cell with this button here. I can click lock the aspect ratio or unlock aspect ratio, and which allows me to, of course, in this case, have an unlocked aspect ratio. But if I lock it, then I can move this around, and of course that stays locked. And then it doesn't change as I'm increasing or decreasing the size of this. Or again, as I mentioned, you can play with this manually. Any one of these presets here, by the way, where it says 8x10, click on it, adds an 8x10 cell. What I can do there is I can go down to edit and I can create my own custom aspect ratio here. And that will add to this list of presets that are supplied to me by Adobe. So yeah, again, a canvas where I can add just one big one or a bunch of different ones. And how we get this canvas, how we define this canvas, I should say, I do in this page setup section. So I've got a page setup. It's not looking the way I was hoping it would look for some reason. Let me see if interesting. And this new version, there we go. The user interface of this page setup looks different with this new version of Lightroom, so it threw me off. Anywho, here's where we can define what kind of paper we're printing it on. So there's our US letter or 8.5 by 11 cut sheet, or here's our predetermined sizes. You can buy 17 by 22 inch cut sheets. There's your 17 by 22 inch cut sheet, or 11 by 17 inch cut sheet. Or we can go to manage custom sizes and we can add a size here. I clicked this plus button. I can define, now let's say I'm throwing a 24-inch roll on my printer. There's 24 inches height by, and we can do this as big as we want. Say I want to do the 24 by 36. Well, I can do 24, give a little bit of room there. 37. I'll just make it 36. We'll print to bleed, if you will, and then define the margins by 0 there and 0 there and 0 there. You get the idea. So this is where we define the kind of the size of the canvas that we're working with here. And if I hit go, as you can see, that changes. You can tell it changes because we're at 20, 30, 36 there on the width, and the height is 24. So that's how we determine that. Couple more things I want to show you here. Again, this is a quick overview. Is if you want to print with background colors or identity plates or put lettering on this, you have those options too, but I don't play with these very often. This is the I'm sorry, one more thing I would like to point out to you is if you want to do a print where you want to show cut guides, and one it would be convenient to show a cut guide is, let's say, for example, I'm printing an image with a lot of white on the edges, and you don't know exactly where the end or the edge of that print is after it's printed, but it has to fit into a certain frame or into a certain overmat window. Printing a cut guide is going to be helpful with that. And then it just simply, Lightroom will then just print lines along where those edges would be, so you know where to trim it at the end of the day. But here's the most important panel. And I say most important panel because then kind of brings us back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this, of the most important thing that we need to have in mind when creating that perfect print, is that ICC stuff that I was mentioning to you. Begins with the use of this panel here, and that's the print job. And the print job panel here, we're going to send a print to, of course, the printer. We're not going to select draft mode printing. Right now, the print resolution is set to 360. A lot of images come in to our raw converter, our Lightroom raw converter, with a PPI of 240. It's just a default that's used for reasons that have nothing to do with modern printing needs. It has to do with how it kind of feeds into a 2440 resolution that I don't even go into. But 240 is kind of a default resolution that's still used. But what you should set that at, Eric and I were talking about this the other day. I'm under the impression it's not very important. Eric's under the impression it is, in the sense that he's seen results differently from one to one. One use to another. But what my experience is that whether this is left at its default of 240, or you set it to 360, or quite frankly, even if you set it to 700, depending what you do with the settings and the driver determines what you're actually printing it at. And what I mean by that is that if I'm setting this to a resolution of 2440 with vector graphic specific style of printing, it's going to print out of that print head at 300 DPI with the kind of printer that I had, which means that it's going to, as the file is rasterized and sent to the driver, it's going to just automatically go to 300 DPI, not PPI. The difference being in this world we live in Lightroom, I said PPI, which refers to pixels per inch, a digital reference. And then it was like things go to print, it shifts over to DPI, which refers to dots per inch, which is a non-digital, more dropping ink on the paper reference. But in terms of resolution, or I should say dots per inch or pixels per inch, they refer to generally the same thing. We have options for choosing print sharpening for standard, high or low, pretty simple, glossy versus matte, very simple stuff, 16-bit versus non-16-bit output, very important and a great thing. One of the big reasons why I print through Lightroom, because it offers this capability, which is noticeable with printing directly from raw files. But then going quickly past that, I want to bring you over to this selection here. And that's the profile. Let me back up a second. We're in the color management side of the print job here now, okay? And the color management side of the print job here, we can choose to have things managed by the printer, or we can choose a specific profile. And in this case, I selected, and actually let me use this over here. In this particular case, I've chosen a HFA EPSSC P20000, whole big name to this specific profile, but this is a Hahnemuhle profile that I got directly from the manufacturer of the paper for my specific printer. Now, this is where things get interesting and where we get to start talking about this ICC color management stuff for you guys to start getting consistency with your prints, whether you're doing it at home or sending them to labs like me. Having an understanding of what these profiles are is important and how they work. A profile is, in this particular case, I said by Hahnemuhle, is something that was made by them, by that company, for a specific paper that they have and for a specific printer that I use. Okay. And I have to have that chosen for the printer I'm using, for the paper I'm using, to gain consistency. Now, there are other factors involved in this, but that is the thing that I'm going to use as a segue to introduce our guest, Eric Joseph, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about color management, the important aspects of color management. And we'll have, Eric and I will have a back and forth when we go on this about how you should start thinking about this in your workflow moving forward, regardless of whether or not you're printing at home or printing with a lab such as myself. So that said, Eric, how are you?
It's a hell of a segue. Okay, any questions? It's going to be a lot of questions now. You just threw a lot of shit in the wall, man. Come on.
I threw a lot of. I tend to do that. That was my concise version, by the way.
So, so you use the word consistency a lot. I used to do that as well. I use the word now more predictability, right? That's really kind of what we're after is
good.
When we look at our computer screen, what comes out of our printer looks like that. And consistently to me is getting the same results over and over again. So, and it's hard. It's really hard. I'm not going to, I've built my career out of helping people understand all of this stuff and try to make it fun rather than complicated. And certainly many people print out of Lightroom. I have a little bit of a different pathway. But as always, you talk to 100 different photographers, you're going to get 100 different answers because the manufacturers incorporate, lots of different ways to do things. So, Jason, you mind if I kind of start at the beginning? You could say no.
It depends what you mean by the beginning, like Genesis or
no, not that far back.
Okay.
As some of you know, because you've taken my classes, I teach at a nonprofit photographic education organization called Los Angeles Center of Photography. I'm very often a guest speaker for lots of different organizations and such. And by the way, if any of you are up in the Monterey or Northern California area, Sacramento and such, I will be up there the week of August 17th. Starting on the 19th, I'll be in Sacramento. I'm working my way across to Oakland, San Francisco, down to Monterey. Jason and I are going to get together. And I have a class, part of a class that I teach. There is a recording of it on the internet. It's called The 6 Steps to Making Perfect Inkjet Prints. And I don't really want to go through it in detail, but I do kind of want to show some slides if I could.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of explaining some of what's going on here.
Yeah, please do. And while you're queuing it up, I want to say one more thing, because as you were going off on that, I don't think I did a great job on introducing you in the way that I should have. And I want to say,
hold on 1 second. Can you allow me to share my screen, please?
I can.
Thank you.
You're good. First, thanks for coming, Eric, and doing this. I know I put you on the spot in the last Lightroom live session we have, but luckily you agreed to do this. But I've known Eric for several years now. And I think when I first met Eric, I saw him. That's right. I remember where now. I was teaching a workshop or two at the Center for Photographic Art many years ago. And Eric, there was this particular there was an event at the Center for Photographic Art where there was a lot of different people teaching different things there. I think it was called Pi or whatever we called it back in those days. And so Eric was one of the people that was giving a talk there. And Eric laid out, he did this talk, and he still does this talk. I'm sure it's much different now, on introducing people to papers, photographic papers. And it was just really eye-opening to me. I'd never heard anybody give a talk about photo papers with as much depth as I saw Eric did. And most importantly, because of where he works, he has at his fingertips this access to all of these different papers that the industry provides now. So he was able to show us all of these papers in terms of, here's what this manufacturer does and that manufacturer does, and this finish versus that finish, and this texture and that texture, and heavy-weighted papers and light-weighted papers. And it was just very eye-opening. And since then, Eric and I have had many conversations, and as nerdy as I am about all of this photography stuff, he's, and I say this affectionately, nerdier than I am, so much so that I find myself learning stuff from him about printing every time I speak to him. So I love chatting with the guy. So it's a real treat to have him here. above and beyond that list of things that he says that he does in terms of working with this and that institute, he's a great resource. So thanks again for coming, Eric.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. So I am going to share, let's see, let me see if I can work this and share my keynote. Do you see that, Jason?
I do.
Okay, so, this would normally be about an hour conversation. I'm going to kind of zip through it. So this is me. I work for Freestyle Photographic and Imaging Supplies. We're in Hollywood, California. We do shipping all over the world. We've been in business for a very, very long time, over 75 years. And I help run the company now. And I've really focused my efforts on helping people understand digital fine art printmaking. So this class would be called the 6 Steps to Making the Perfect Print. And a lot of it doesn't really have anything to do with any of what Jason has already described. It's all of the things to set you up for success in printing. And especially if you're going to print with somebody like Jason, whether you're going to print yourself or you're going to print with somebody like Jason, these are all of the important things that you really need to think about. And they're the things that hardly anybody really talks about. But every day I'm having conversations with people who have not done these 6 things and they run into trouble. So the first thing is having the right monitor. And we sell BenQ monitors, but there's other brands out there. The important thing is really Apple's not your friend when it comes to monitors. Everything they make is designed around digital video. And we carry a line called BenQ, which I'll talk about in a minute. They're a very famous brand, and they're very reasonably priced. And the specific range of monitors that we recommend are ones that are called the SW series that are designed specifically for photographers who want to edit still images to print their work. That's what they're for. They're not for editing video. They'll certainly do that, but their specific reason why they've been created is to help you be able to render an image on your screen that looks closer to what's going to come out of your printer. 2, calibrating your monitor. Monitor calibration are 2 words that strike fear in the hearts of most photographers. Why do I have to calibrate my monitor? Well, if your monitor is too dark or too light or too yellow or too green, too blue, you have no idea what you're looking at. You don't have a reference point of being able to understand how that image is going to look. And your monitor drifts over time. Your monitor, brand new out of the box, is not the same monitor that it's going to be a month later, a year later, or 2 years later. Every monitor drifts over time, except, I got to tell you, Apple monitors, the new ones with the white LEDs, are really consistent. They're really, really consistent. But they are too bright, too contrasty, and are the wrong color space and very glossy. So it doesn't really represent or render what you're going to get out of an inkjet printer. 3, paper. And to me, if you're going to print, paper is really the most important part of the process, right? What is the paper you're going to print on, and how is that going to relate to your unique artistic signature? Spend a lot of time working with and talking to people about paper. What type of paper? If I take your file, and I were to print it, or Jason were to print it on 8 different papers, you would have 8 totally different looking images, but they wouldn't look different on your monitor. So there's a certain art associated with this in addition to the science. 4th, choosing the right printer, whether you're going to have somebody print for you, or you're going to print yourself. We talk about a lot, the choices that one makes in deciding what printer is right for them. And then I talk a lot about custom paper profiles. Now, what Jason brought up on his screen was Hahnemuhle's generic profile for their paper. Manufacturers provide profiles, but we can do a little better. We have the ability to create custom profiles for people as well. And then the last part of this is lighting. And actually, to me, more than anything else, that's almost the most important part. And I'll show you why in a little bit. So people always ask me things like, what do I need? What do I have to have? I hate terms like that. I really do. The bottom line is all of this is about happiness and what makes you happy. If you're using a 10-year-old iMac and you're pushing print, and what comes out of that printer, when you look at it, looks like that monitor, you don't need to do any of this stuff, right? It's all about happiness and consistency. If you're having problems, if you're like, well, my prints are coming out too dark, or, I'm getting lines in my prints, or whatever, any number of stumbling blocks or speed bumps you can hit in the process, then you've got a problem that you've got to solve. And that's kind of where I come in. I spend my days working with people literally all over the world on these types of issues. So these are BenQ monitors. They're Adobe RGB 1998. 99%, that's the spec that all the manufacturers kind of adhere to. They come with viewing hoods, which keeps extraneous light off of it. They're flat matte screens, and they're totally appropriate for what we do in terms of editing images that we intend to print. Your Apple monitors are great for watching movies on iTunes and streaming movies on iTunes and editing video. Apple monitors are also a different color space. They're P3 color space, which is different from Adobe RGB 1998. And that's the color space that our inkjet printers were designed around in terms of their color gamut. If there was a paper that could print full Adobe RGB 1998 gamut, that ink in that printer would do it. But we are, in fact, limited by the coatings on the papers from realizing full Adobe RGB 1998. Also, by the way, glossy and luster papers have more color gamut than matte papers. It's just the way they're made.
Eric, sorry to interrupt. I just want to add a little something to what you're saying. Is I totally agree with Dead Right. And I want to add something to it for those that might not be understanding why you're saying what you're saying about a BenQ versus an Apple. And there's a reason why Eric is saying that. It's important to know, because especially with these new Apple monitors that we're seeing coming out now, not only with the beautiful shiny screens and P3 color spaces, they're really big, beautiful, almost as nice, almost as big as a pro photo sort of color space. But why Eric is saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, why it doesn't matter as much to get a 5K P3 super shiny screen as much as it is a BenQ, or so a couple other manufacturers I use an NEC. There's ISO, which is a big one as well, is because we photographers, unlike a videographer, don't care as much about 4K and 5K and this stuff as much. We care about color. We care about color accuracy. We care about this stuff that we're talking about right now, and having, as Eric put it, predictability from one medium to another, and having monitors that can render color the way we want to see it, more than the detail, is important. So an Apple monitor, great, it's 5K. We don't care. BenQ or ISO or NEC is going to do a better job, because of what it can do with color. Going to do a better job for us photographers.
So this is the confusion that we have in photography. The manufacturers start trying to lure us in with specifications. And the specifications 4K, 5K are for video. It's a video specification. And if you've ever set your monitor at 4K or 5K, guess what? Everything gets smaller. So I've had a 4K monitor. I back it off to 2.5K because I can't use Photoshop and Lightroom because everything's too small, right? So Apple's new monitors are using the word nit. That was also a video monitor standard. It's the same thing as a Candela or a Lumen or a Lux, but now we've got monitors that are 1,000 nits. Well, when you're calibrating your monitor, our industry standard that we use when we calibrate our monitor is actually 120 candelas or 120 nits. Why do we need a monitor that's 1,000 nits? Well, to watch movies in bright sunlight on our Apple computer. So it's a little confusing because we get into these specs wars, especially like with sensors, right? Everybody wants full frame sensor. Well, many of my cameras are crop sensor cameras and they shoot perfectly fine. And especially at the size that I'm printing at, I don't need a 50 megabyte, megapixel full frame sensor to print 13 by 19. I'm not really going to see the benefit. So BenQ is a brand that has a great value for performance, and is this particular series, which is the SW series, is what we use for editing still images for printing. Now, BenQ makes a lot of other monitors. They make a designer series. They make less expensive 4K monitors that are sRGB. Well, they don't have the same color gamut, or they have P3 color space, or they have different features. Bottom line is, when you're choosing a monitor, it's all about recognizing what your purpose is and then finding out what the best application is. For instance, the other day, somebody came to me who isn't a photographer at all, but they're like, oh, I heard that 32-inch BenQ SW321C is a great value. Yeah, $2,000, it is a great value for that type of monitor, but you're never going to use that capability. You're better off buying the $1,000 BenQ monitor, right? So it's all about application. Anyway, so one of the things I always like to say is photography has always been a combination of art and science, and color management is the science part of it. It's what allows us to achieve predictable, consistent, reliable, repeatable, and controllable results. And without it, you're pushing print and you're rolling the dice. You never know quite what you're going to get. So it's important for us to learn how to use our printers. And again, the manufacturers start saying, well, this printer is better because it has more colors. Well, not necessarily. What kind of colors are in your file, right? What type of profile are you using? How are you using it? Well, Jason talked about the profile, but he didn't talk about the media type setting. If you use the wrong media type setting associated with that paper, i.e., you're going to print with a photo black or a matte black in your printer, doesn't matter what your profile is, you're going to get poor results. So it's important to learn how to use your printer and how to use all of the aspects of the driver. And as Jason said, it can be daunting, but we're here to make it easier for sure. So here's kind of how everything works. So I've got a picture of an Apple iMac with my kind of famous golden pavilion that I use a lot. And people have this kind of misconception that somehow the monitor is connected to the printer. And that's not really true. In fact, it's not true at all. Your monitor and your printer are two separate devices. They're two different technologies. And color management is how we get, it's kind of what we would call the translator. It allows us to have that predictability. So the reality of what goes on here is that your file's on your computer and it gets sent to the monitor. Now, if you have an iMac, monitor happens to be built into the computer, but it's still being sent to that monitor, right? It's being sent to the monitor. Now, while you have a cable that goes from your printer to your computer, that monitor and that printer are not connected. So the proof of this is this: make a print and then adjust the brightness of your monitor up or down dramatically, make another print. You will see nothing will change in your print, right? That's why we calibrate a monitor. Most people come to me and say, my prints are too dark. Well, that's because your monitor's too bright or the light you're viewing it under is too dark. Your printer is just printing the data that's going to it. And if you don't have a solid and accurate reference point, i.e., a calibrated monitor, you are rolling the dice every time you hit print. Would you agree with that, Jason?
Absolutely. 100%.
Well, you didn't have to say it like that. Okay.
Absolutely.
So what's a profile, right? So when we calibrate a monitor, we calibrate a printer, this is basically what a profile is. I try to use analogies to make it simple. So the profile is the difference between how your monitor or printer is representing color. Now, it's supposed to, according to the standards set up by the ICC, or International Color Consortium. It's a mathematical equation, and it's simply the difference. So just like if you went to the eye doctor, you would read this chart, and they'd put your head in the machine maybe, and they would create a prescription pair of glasses for you. My glasses, it is a custom profile for my eyes. It's not like me going to Walgreens and getting +2 readers, right, which are good for everybody. That would be a generic profile. The custom profile is my prescription that I paid a lot of money for That's the difference between how my eyes see and how I'm supposed to see according to the ophthalmological or optometrical standard of what 20/20 vision is. That's what the ICC is. They have determined a way of being able to identify and measure color mathematically on a scale so that if your color is off, we can create a profile that corrects for it. So your monitor, when you're calibrating it, is creating a file that is like a custom pair of glasses. And when we do printing, when we do paper profiles, we are creating the same thing for our printer. We cannot calibrate a printer. Every printer prints a little differently. They could, especially the desktop models, can be up to 10% off. So that's when we start seeing color shifts and people start saying, hey, my black and white prints are coming out a little green or a little red or a little yellow. That's because the generic profile they're providing you is off for your printer. And by creating a custom profile, that corrects for it, just like my glasses do. So devices we use, this is a new device from Calibrite. They have a brand new line. This HL series will in fact calibrate an Apple XDR display with mini LED. So this is their new line. This is probably going to be the most.
Hey, Eric, we only see, are you advancing slides as you're talking? Because I'm only seeing, okay, that's not working then.
Why didn't you tell me that?
Because I didn't know you were doing that until you said referencing something specific.
Okay,
now
so let me stop sharing. Let me go to my desktop then.
I was waiting for you to advance a slide. I was like, when are we to stop staring at this picture of Eric?
Why didn't you tell me? See, I've been going along like this. Somebody's supposed to tell me. Okay.
I'm very
So I'm not going to go through this again. I'm just going to kind of advance through here. So now you see what I've been talking about, right?
Yep.
You're seeing these change?
I see a change. Right? I see another change. Okay, we're going.
Okay, so these are the 6 steps to making perfect inkjet prints. And see, that's the weird thing about Zoom. You never know when something goes wrong. Okay, so here are BenQ monitors. Here's my little sayings. Here is files on the computer goes to the monitor, files on the computer goes to the printer. And then this is a profile, custom pair of glasses. So that's kind of where we left off there. These are the new Calibrite colorimeters. They do monitor calibration. This is going to be the most popular one because it's going to be able to do basically any monitor on the market today. There's a lower priced one for $169 we're getting in shortly, which is basic functionality, will only calibrate a standard technology monitor. It will not calibrate an Apple XDR display with mini LED. That's going to be the Calibrite Display SL. And then there's another one that's more expensive. They're about $340, and it will calibrate any monitor up to 10,000 nits. You will be able to get a sunburn in front of that display, and that's future-proof. You'll never, ever have to buy another device.
Yeah, but what Eric's showing there is what I use here in the lab.
So color space, I'm sure you've covered this with them in the past, but just briefly.
I have not, no.
Oh, really? Okay, so this will be good. How much time do we have, by the way? Are we on until 7:30 or 6?
I expected this one to go a little bit later because we're both a bit loquacious here, Eric. So don't worry about it. But if you can, shoot for 7. Quickly. Shoot for
I'll do the $5 tour or the nickel tour, right?
Perfect.
So sRGB is called standard RGB. Sorry, there's people out there that get very judgy with this stuff. It doesn't stand for shitty RGB. I'm sorry. It's standard RGB. It's totally appropriate for somebody who wants to make a print on photo paper or C prints. If you're uploading your file to some of the bigger, printing houses in the world, like Bay Photo or White House or Miller's, they're going to, whatever you send them, they're going to dumb it down to sRGB. It's a smaller color space. They don't want to handle the larger file. It's totally appropriate for C prints or chromogenic prints. But if we're doing fine art printing, we really want to use Adobe RGB 1998. It was established as a standard color space for digital fine art printing in 1998. So it is not outdated. I have people that say, oh, I don't use that because it got discontinued in 1998. Nope, it's still valid. And as you can see with the wireframe, it is in fact bigger than sRGB. And that's the color space that we usually use as our standard for digital fine art printing. And the illustration on the right is showing you the difference in 2D. You'll see that a lot in magazines and such. So sRGB is the smaller space and Adobe RGB 1998 is the larger space. Now, we have this third color space called Pro Photo. And a lot of talk about Pro Photo. It's the standard for Lightroom because it basically mimics what the full spectrum of what we can see as human beings. It was designed as a reference to mimic what we can see. But then you'll see at the bottom, it's got that little blue area, blue violet. That's ultraviolet, and it's what we really call a theoretical or fantasy color space, because very rarely do colors in printing really go out that far, and it's huge. It's a huge color space. So if you use it, just be mindful that your files will be bigger, because when Photoshop and Lightroom create a Pro Photo file, it's got to create a file that will accommodate those colors. It also is a little odd in that it was never really optimized for skin tones. So that's why you see a lot of portrait photographers using sRGB or Adobe RGB 1998, because those color spaces were optimized for skin tones. So if you're a landscape photographer, it's okay to use Adobe RGB, Pro Photo RGB, but really there's no monitor that can render colors outside of Adobe RGB 1998. So you might have the colors in your file, but you wouldn't be able to see them on your monitor. So that's one of the disconnects. And the manufacturers are not even making a monitor that I'm aware of that they can tell me that would render Pro Photo RGB. So you get outside of Adobe RGB 1998 or P3, now we're really into a level of unpredictability, right? So I try to standardize for Adobe RGB 1998. And then we talked about monitors. So
Eric, I'm gonna chime in with something that I think, in my humble opinion, is relatively important since you're talking about Pro Photo. Can you go back a slide real quick? So looking at the image on the left there, we have 1, 2, 3 outlines for different
sRGB, Adobe RGB 1998, and Pro Photo.
There you go. So we have 3 different outlines for 3 different types of profiles. Now, what all that you really need to care about, if you're a photographer that's working in Photoshop, like Eric said, Lightroom defaults to Pro Photo. So you don't need to worry about it, about what you're working within, but you do in Photoshop. And I say you do in Photoshop because for whatever reason, and I'm 99% sure this is still the case with the new dot releases of Photoshop, if it's not good for Adobe, but up until the last one, this has been the case. The default working space for Photoshop is sRGB. And I don't know why that is. I think it has to do with this is not a program that's just simply designed for photographers as much as it is graphic designers. But what I mean by working space is this. Look at the 2 inner outlines. You have one in black and one in color. Okay, so if you bring an image in that is got an embedded profile with a black outline, and the working space is that inner color outline, that means that that program that you're working within that has that sRGB color space is going to confine the colors that you're working with as you're editing or developing or playing with your photo. We do not like that when we're playing with photos from a fine art. We want to make big prints perspective. So one of the things that I tell all photographers, if you're working in Photoshop and editing in Photoshop, you have to do is step 1 is make sure that working space is not set at its default at sRGB. You have to go into the program and you have to change it to Pro Photo. If you're one of those, I'm sure there's very few, if any of you in the audience here right now that are one of those, but if you are, contact. Okay, I'll shut up. Go for it, Eric.
No, this is the panel you're talking about.
That's it. So the default is on the top there. He has it listed as Adobe RGB. The default is sRGB. But if you
Correct.
click on that where it says Adobe RGB, one of the options is Pro Photo. Go into that. That way, if you come in with a file that's with whatever gamut or profile that's is embedded in it, because Pro Photo is such a big space, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, you're going to be able to have everything in Pro Photo. Now, again, you talk to 100 photographers, you get 100 different answers. I standardize for Adobe RGB 1998, and then I check these little boxes so that when I get a file that's different, Photoshop alerts me. That's what these boxes do. It tells me that the file I'm getting is not Adobe RGB 1998 and asks me what I want to do with it. So let's say it's sRGB. Well, I'm not going to convert that file to Adobe RGB 1998 because I'm not going to get more color. That color has already been clipped out. It's already sRGB.
Eric, can I ask why you're choosing Adobe for your working space and not Pro Photo?
Because I am of the opinion that if I can't see the color on my monitor, and I can't predict it, it's not really that interesting to me. I mean, and the paper profiles are even smaller than the monitor profiles. And while some of the papers can kind of eke out in the Pro Photo, because everything I do is about printing, it's in like the yellows. I mean, how can you really tell the difference between a yellow that's out that far? So my standard is Adobe RGB 1998. Now, that doesn't mean after talking to you that I might not change my mind at a certain point, right? I mean, I present, like you said earlier, I present differently now than I did years ago. But from my experience, especially if you're doing people, Pro Photo RGB does make people's skin tones look a little odd. I mean, unless it's really colorful. I mean, you're talking about capturing a color space that's beyond what you can even see on your monitor, right? Yeah. So to me, if I can't see it, it's not that interesting to me.
That's perfectly logical. I would suggest Pro Photo for the very reason of a term that you used earlier, and that's future tech. And we're dealing, especially if we're dealing with photos that have a really broad gamut, like an HDR photo. You can't see a lot of it with an Adobe RGB, but that doesn't mean that with future tech or with, I mean, there are profiles that I've analyzed that are printing, a part of the spectrum is tweaked beyond Adobe RGB in this corner of the gamut or that corner of the gamut. So for that reason alone, I tend to, and I'm picking nits here, but I tend to suggest Pro Photo because it allows us to play it safe, especially with those images that have a lot of bit depth.
Sure, absolutely. And so here's another, I mean, we're getting in the weeds here, but this
Sorry, everybody.
No, it's good. This is all good. It's good to have varying opinions as long as you don't start, calling each other names. I mean, I've done workshops where I get people in there to say, as far as I'm concerned, if you're not shooting and saving and working in Pro Photo RGB, I don't consider you a real photographer. Well, that's just, that to me just means you don't even know what it means. You just think bigger is better. My lens is bigger than your lens. I have more pixels in my camera than you do. My sensor's larger than yours. Really, it doesn't make you better. I have seen some of the worst photos, some of the worst images ever taken with some of the most expensive equipment. So to me, it's not what you have, it's what you do with it. Show me your print. That's what I'm really interested in, right? This is all how to get there, right? So these diagrams show the difference in color space between Adobe RGB 1998 and an Apple P3. So this is where the disconnect is for me, because if you look at the P3 color space, you'll see that it has more out there in the reds and the oranges. And I've had customers come to me with a bright red streak in their image on their computer screen, but it prints rust. And when I look at the exact same image on a BenQ monitor, it looks exactly the way it's going to print because of the disconnect in the color space, right? So those are your differences. They're both wide gamut, but they're wide gamut in different ways. And that's where it gets a little confusing. So again, it's all about predictability. And like I said, if you have an Apple display, and by the way, the old Apple displays were all sRGB, until they became P3. And Apple chose it because, again, it's a digital video standard, right? So here's a really good friend of mine, a really good customer as well. His name is Osceola Refetov, and he loves to play with these colors that are way out there. So he has an image like this, which was a pinhole image that he took in Antarctica, of all places. And he played with the colors, and he came up with these colors that when he printed, all of it was like so faded. There was just no way that printer on that paper was going to print that color. And the program I kind of blipped up a little earlier was called ColorThink Pro. So I took his file, I put it in there, I mapped it, and I go, look how far away that color is from what that paper can actually render. And so the image comes out, that color comes out muted. Now, when he soft proofs, right, when he applies that profile in Lightroom to the computer screen, just sees the color just drop. He goes, oh no. Yeah. So, but he wasn't looking at it that way. Again, predictability. He saw it on his screen, thought he could print it without realizing that that paper profile, which is a custom profile, is for 100 milli photorag metallic, which doesn't even have a white. Look at where the white point is. It's so far down, right? Because it's a silver-based paper. It has no white. That paper has no hope of ever printing that color, right? And he's constantly in the battle. In fact, he just recently came to me with another problem where he could see in actually Capture One, because that's what he uses, that there was a gamut warning for a color on his screen, but when he toggled back and forth, he couldn't see the difference. And when I mapped it, that color was beyond P3. It was into ProPhoto. And the reason why I couldn't see the difference is because he reached the technical limit of how that color renders on his monitor. He couldn't see the difference because it was so far out. So, these are our problems. These are our problems. Getting these technologies to a point where we can have some level of predictability, and understanding how this works is important. So we talked about this panel, which is something I always talk about. You want to set it to ProPhoto? Great. You want to set it to sRGB if you want. That's fine too. Just be mindful that this is actually a very important panel, and it allows you to control the files that are coming into your computer. So this is really about printing, right? So I just have a couple of slides here on paper. We have lots of different types of papers to choose from. You see behind me, I have 18 prints on the wall. Every image was taken by me. These were all taken by me. And when I shoot, I'm thinking about the personality and character of the paper. So every image that I print has some predictability in it. There's some pre-visualization on my part where I knew that, let's say on the after hours depository Dropbox, I've got a couple of those. I printed those on on matte papers with a lot of texture, and my prints look as three-dimensional in real life as they do on a computer screen like that. They're just jumping off the page, yet most people don't think a matte paper with texture is going to render an image really sharp with a lot of depth and dimension. It's all about having some level of predictability. And to me, paper is an integral part of the conversation in terms of creating a unique artistic signature. It's about, for me, I don't think I'm the greatest photographer. I take some nice photographs. I know how to compose, but when people look at my prints, they're astounded at what I've been able to accomplish. And Stephen Anchel, who you might know, he wrote the Film Developing Cookbook or Film Developing Manual and Darkroom Cookbook and all sorts of other prints. Early on when I was doing presentations, he goes, Eric, what you're really doing is taking ordinary images and making them into extraordinary prints. And my goal is for you and every individual that when people look at your prints, they are awed by the selection you've made that really matches your unique artistic signature. And then if you use the code inkjet10, you'll get 10% off all inkjet paper on our website. So write that down. So a way to kind of get through the weeds on this is we have a area on our website called the World of Inkjet Paper Comparison Chart. So I keep this up to date. It's a literally a chart of every paper we offer, with it's sorted by brand name, but all of it can be resorted and searched. It's got paper thickness, weight, whether it's made of 100% cotton or other things, whether it's optical brighteners, which is a big topic that I talk about a lot. And then there's a rating scale, and people very much use this as a reference to get kind of an idea of maybe what paper they would want to use. We also have a service that I perform for people all the time called an inkjet paper psychotherapy session. I think a few people in the audience have taken me up on those in the past. It costs $99. And basically, if you're in town, if you're so I'm in Los Angeles, you can make an appointment with me and come on in with a file, and I'll print it on a bunch of different papers. I don't really limit it. Basically anything we can do in a couple of hours and show you and help you decide what paper's right for you. When I do them remotely, which I do for people all over the world, I kind of limit it to 8, and we have, you sign up on our website. We'll have a conversation about what you might like or might not like in paper, and then we'll make a decision and print the image on up to 8 different papers, and I'll send them to you in the mail, and we'll have a conversation about them. At the very least, we have the beginnings of a further conversation. At the very best, you have 1, 2, or 3 papers you can move forward with, and knowing that you're also seeing the best print. And as you can see behind me, I have both an Epson and a Canon printer. When people have an Epson printer, I use the SureColor P900. And when people have a Canon printer, I actually use my Canon Pro 4100. I have a 44-inch printer here in my little home office here, in addition to the Pro 1000. So I work on both companies' printers. I'm actually a beta tester for Canon, very close with Epson. I integrate with both companies and know their hardware and software like the back of my hand. So
I want to add a quick thing to that, Eric, because what what Eric's talking about here is kind of critically important. Choosing a paper is a critically important step. And if you are not in the area, yes, take him up on the offer of printing on 8 or so. What's probably will be great about working with him, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, is you can probably pick and choose a little bit from his vast catalog of possible papers you can print on to play with different things. But along those lines, if you're not printing at home and you're printing at a lab, one of the services that we also offer here, and of course, if you're printing with me, is to just simply order a paper sample packet with us, which is $50. And we have 9 different papers that we print on here. Again, economy line and a fine art line, which range in all of those things that he talked about in terms of textures and materials, from resin coated papers to cotton rag papers to Baryta papers to highly textured matte papers to what Hannah Mueller refers to as their natural line of papers, which consists of sustainably harvested materials like bamboo, agave, hemp, and sugarcane. So we print on most of those as well. You can send us a file and we can print on all 9 papers for you, so you can see all of the different finishes and textures and hold them in your hands and see which one kind of matches your vision for your style.
Absolutely. So it's really all about to me all about paper. I mean, all of this stuff is what it all leads up to is what kind of paper do you want to use? And many oftentimes, just from an education standpoint, especially when I do my classes, I'll print on like a standard luster paper first, and then you'll go, oh, that looks like a really nice print, like a resin coated luster paper. Then when I go to a fine art paper, let's say 100 milli Photorag Baryta or Canson Platine, the difference is astounding in terms of the depth and dimension of the image. The resin coated luster and glossy papers that we use really have a very ink on paper look. They're very two-dimensional, very flat looking. As soon as we go to a fine art paper, you see pretty quickly that, you know, your image quality jumps dramatically. And those papers are, quite frankly, more expensive, but they're worth it, you know, if you're really focused on printing and how much. So, you know, but again, these are all the things that we go through in terms of decision-making our decision-making process. So I'm jumping around here a little bit. So we have desktop printers, of course, take up less space, but they do have a higher cost of ownership than the large format printers do. These, of course, cost more, but your cost per milliliter is less, and you do print faster. And I'm super familiar with, you know, all the, you know, the what we call the aqueous archival pigment printers from both companies. We don't, and I don't really deal with the workforce printers and the ones you can get at Best Buy and the multifunction printers. I really focus on the printers that people are going to use for, you know, fine art printing and what you would call an archival pigment print. And then
I want to add,
Jason,
sorry to interrupt again, but I want to add something into that as well, because Epson a few years ago, we're using one of these for canvases. Epson a few years ago released what's referred to as a solvent printer, which is the kind of printer that's usually used not so much in fine art, for fine art applications, but more commercial applications. But we're using it for printing on canvases because this new one that they released a few years ago has as large of an ink set as these aqueous pigment ink printers that Erica is referring to, and that means broad gamut, fine detail, and we get to use it on canvases without having to cure them with lacquers. It's a great way to make canvases, and what I mean by that is most times you order canvases from a lab that has to be, a lacquer's got to be painted on it to protect it. And to get those colors looking vibrant, because an aqueous ink printer and canvases, when those are put together, things come out looking really muted and dull. But not the case with a solvent ink printer. So we started using those on canvases a few years back, and it does a really amazing job. But that's the only thing I'd like to add to that in terms of alternatives and with fine art applications.
So both Canon and Epson, if you have your own Canon or Epson printer and you're printing yourself, yes, you can use Lightroom or Photoshop to print. I find those programs a little cumbersome, a little complicated, but you can absolutely use them if you're comfortable with them. But both Canon and Epson do have, for their more modern printers, some other printing interfaces that they provide you for free. That, to me, everything that you need to choose is on the right-hand column. Everything you need, your layout mode, your media type, your paper size, paper source, everything is in one column. So you can export that to either from Lightroom or Photoshop into, this is Canon Professional Print and Layout. And then the real key to this program, it isn't nearly as full functional as Lightroom is, but it does allow you to do multiple page layouts very easily. So it has what we call some RIP level functionality. Yes, the Lightroom print module is much more complex, much more full featured than this. But if you're printing one or two or multiple images on a page like this, it's very easy to use, and it's a free download. I also have on LACP's website a video called Introduction to Canon Professional Print and Layout. It's about 2 hours long, and it goes through the program in great detail. Epson has their own version for their own printers. This is Epson Print Layout. And again, everything is in one column, organized in the order in which you need to choose things, and really gives you only what you need to make a print, not all the other features. For a lot of people, I call this the easy button. And then when we talk about profiles, here's a really good example that I've simulated, honestly, but it is very accurate to real life. You know, I have a print here that I shot digital infrared in Bodie Ghost Town. A lot of you probably recognize this building. And I printed it on paper and used the manufacturer's profile. And I went, you know, to me, that looks a little off. Most people look at it and go, oh, it looks perfect. It looks great. Well, I created a custom profile, and because two printers are the same, and every paper has its own color fingerprint, sometimes things are off a little bit. So I made a profile, and bingo, I now have a neutral image. And I show these prints whenever I'm talking about profiles in my classes, because I was getting all sorts of calls of people using profiles from the manufacturer saying, why are my prints coming out a little green? Some people didn't notice, but the reality is you didn't see the difference until you actually, or you didn't notice the difference until you saw the difference. And that's kind of the key thing with any of this stuff. When I teach my classes, I like to show the difference. So our custom paper profile service is $99. And what you would do is print out this test target on your printer under our directions. We have PDF files on our website, and then we put them on a machine that looks like this. It's called a Barbieri. It's very expensive, and all it does is make paper profiles. And you send those patches to us because we have to read them, and then we send you back the profile. And then you apply it in Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever your program is, and you're off and running. So here's the very last part, is lighting. And to me, it's really—
Can I ask you a quick question about that,
absolutely.
Eric?
Yep.
So can you go back a slide?
Yep. You gotta go back.
Back. And now forward.
I'm going forward. I got these little special effects in there.
They're very fancy.
Yeah.
So the Barbieri. So now that's fancy, for lack of a better word. Now, any one of us can go buy like an i1 and calibrate ourselves and do that. Can you talk to the difference between, your average consumer doing something like that and doing something like what you're offering here with the Barbieri?
So not all color management devices are made equal. I think like Calibrite has a device, because that's X-Rite now for these types of products, that will do both monitor calibration and paper profile, and it costs about $500 or $600. To me, it's more cost effective to buy the color management device for your monitor for $170 or $280 and have us create a profile. How many profiles are you really going to make? And the colors that they're sampling are 256 or whatever. And the sensor they're using isn't nearly as sophisticated as this. You can see there's 2,108 patches in this sample set. And the technology that we're using is very different from that device. All I can say is that for $600, you'll get something that'll calibrate a monitor pretty well and will actually do a fairly good job on glossy and luster papers. Where it will fall down is on matte papers. Our profiles are far superior on matte paper. Done a lot of testing on them. So if you do get that device for $500 or $600, yeah, you can do glossy or luster paper pretty good. Still not as good as us, but better than a manufacturer's profile. Now, to get the quality that we're doing, and this device, by the way, is over $10,000. There is a device from X-Rite called, I think it's an i1 Pro Photo Plus 3, right?
Yeah.
And that one is about, I think, 2,600 or something. But in order to get the same number of patches, same quality, you got to print out like it was almost 3,000 patches, because I did all the different numbers, and then I had to scan them in by hand. And by the time I was done, I got severe carpal tunnel syndrome and severe neck trauma just by doing this, and I had to do it several times because I messed up.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Katie was calling me, and
So
I got it.
So to me, $99, well worth us doing it. I make a lot of profiles for people. If you really want to tinker, sure, go for the more expensive X-Rite device and do it, right? You'll get pretty close. But for my money, I'd just rather let us do it ourselves, right? Not that many people are going to invest that much in a device to just for calibrating, just for creating profiles. So, but we do, because we do a professional job at it.
So a little inside info. This is what the pro labs do to get their predictability is they use services like Eric to get custom profiles. You can, as I hinted to at the beginning of this when showing you Lightroom, excuse me, that feature in Lightroom where you can select the profile, and I showed you that Hannah Muley supplied one for my paper and my printer. Yes, you can use those, and for the most part, they'll work pretty well. And I would say most of you would take a print out of that if you have a well-calibrated monitor, just using a manufacturer's profile and think, this looks pretty damn good to me. But the more you'll grow and evolve as a printer over time, and your eye gets more discerning, you might start to see the subtle differences that you're getting from paper, from monitor to paper, and you'll get pickier. And from there, you'll start thinking, this generic profiles aren't really cutting it. I got to step up my game. And the way to do that is to start using services. Either do it on your own, but I don't recommend that because, as he's hinting to, it's really tedious to do that. And you don't get as good of a product as if you're using somebody like Eric who has better equipment and will just do all the work for you. So yeah.
So the last part of this conversation, which is really important, is lighting. And you know what? Early on, I didn't realize how important it really is. We've always relied on these GTI viewing stations for like the last few decades, and they're great. But we have better now. So these GTI viewing stations have been fluorescent tubes, which are kind of passé now. On the right, you're seeing Waveform Lighting, which is a company out of Canada. They sell direct. They sell bulbs that are LED bulbs with very high color rendering index. Amazing how much better those are versus what I used to use, which were Philips Hue lights, which are red, green, blue. And it really has to do with the rendering index of how these bulbs render color. So typically speaking, we want a bulb that's 5000K that simulates bright sunlight, but mankind has not developed a bulb yet that does direct sunlight. So we want to get as close as we can. So we now have some desk lamps that we offer because these GTI light boxes are now anywhere from $900 to $1,600, not an expense that many people are willing to make. If you get your print and take it outside in bright sunlight, high noon, that's our standard. That will match your monitor. Now, if you want to simulate it indoors, we have these three desk lamps now. We have the Ilford Ilfilux, the Graphite from Calibrite, and the Filex. And you can see on the Filex, this is the color of the light. And if you look at your print under different lighting conditions, you'll see how dramatically it changes. Now, kind of the proof of that is this. I put together this little part of the presentation, which is the end, at least the slide before the last, that shows second from the right is bright sunlight, high noon, 5,500 Kelvin, color rendering index of 99.1. Well, I have a lot of people that come to me and say, but I just look at the image next to my window in the shade. I'm like, well, look, that's 9,000K. Your monitor is actually calibrated at D65 usually, or D50, D50 being 5,000K, D65 being 6,500. Now, I prefer 6,500 because it has to do with the way our brain interprets projected light versus reflected light. But I can tell you wholeheartedly, if you're looking at your image next to the window in shade, not the right light. Now, then you see Waveform directly to the left of bright sunlight. It's got a pretty good spectrum to it. And these were all taken with a Sekonic C800 spectrometer. So I'm getting to see the spectrum compared to the other, against each other. As you can see, really, the Graphite light from Calibrite is the biggest of all the spectrum, where all the LED lights fall down, and even the GTI is in red. Look how it just drops, right? So each one of these lights, and these are all at what they're saying is 5,000K or 5,000K-ish, they all have different spectrums, even though they're all fairly high color rendering indexes. So for my money, if I were to get a desk lamp, it would be the Filex, which I kind of like because it's made out of metal. It's got a gooseneck. The Graphilight's a little smaller, but they both have a greater spectrum than the Opholux, even the GTI, which we've had around for years. So it's kind of an interesting illustration there for all these lights. The bottom line is any one of them is better than nothing. Certainly better than looking at your images in the shade next to, in the shade next to a window. Oh, I got through it. Ta-da! Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Do we have any questions?
Yes, let's open up the floor to some questions here. If anybody has any, that is.
So we covered a lot of ground.
So much so that I want to acknowledge that a lot of this stuff is taking a drink of water through a fire hose, and I'll wrap this up a little bit for everybody toward the end here of what we should take away and what's digestible and all this stuff. But any questions?
Hey, Jason, it's Rich Brooks.
Hi, Rich.
Hey, I did years ago. I used D850s, and years ago I did the color profile of my 850s. Then I unload and install those in Lightroom, and then I use a new Spider, was it X2, to profile or calibrate my monitor. What's your thoughts on that whole process?
Go ahead.
No, what do you mean? What's your question? Sorry.
Well, there's that I forget the name, but you take a photograph of a color matrix, and that tells the computer what your camera is reading as true gray or whatever. You upload that, and that's your camera profile in Lightroom.
Right.
Well, so, Rich, it depends on what you shoot, Rich. What do you usually photograph? Landscapes?
And wildlife.
It's not for you.
Okay.
I say it's not for you in terms of, well, it's a great tool if what you care about is color accuracy for what you're seeing, for what you're rendering. Landscape photography, let's not go into wildlife yet, but landscape photography is color-wise a very interpretive thing for the most part, unless you care. If you really, really, really care about making sure that what you're getting is exactly what you saw, then maybe calibrating your camera is what you want to do. I usually reserve making that kind of a suggestion for, let's say, a commercial photographer who, what's a good example, who's doing let's say they're doing a photo shoot for Revlon, and they have a line of 30 different lipstick shades laid out, and they want to make sure that everything is perfectly represented in terms of color accuracy from what they're seeing to what they're getting on print to what they end up with on the billboard. Having a well-calibrated system, which calibrating a camera is just one component of that workflow, becomes critically important. But I think for the most part, landscape photography and even wildlife photography, maybe less so, is highly interpretive. We're shooting a sunset. Well, how bright do we want those colors, or how muted do we want those colors, or saturated do we want those colors? Is something that we usually just determine in the developmental phase of our workshop based on not so much what we remember that we saw as much as the feeling that experience gave us, that we want to use those tools in Lightroom to translate that for us. So I usually don't recommend, not saying you shouldn't do it or it's wrong to do it, but I don't recommend it as a tool that one needs to do that kind of an interpretive art.
Yeah, I agree with Jason, but more importantly, it has to do with the light in a specific scenario. So as a street photographer, you wouldn't be going around putting a color checker in every shot. It has a limited return in terms of its appropriateness for, just general photography. Now, if you're in a studio and the light's a certain light and you want everything in that shot to be the same, that works out fine. And that's why they have that tool available. But I haven't talked about it because, this discussion's been more about printing workflow and color accuracy from monitor to printer. So one day we can go into that in a bit more detail. I think
Thank you.
Louis has his hand up. I think he's got a little hand thing up. You got a question, Louis?
I do.
Okay.
First and foremost, thank you for putting on this wonderful Zoom meeting chat class. I just have, it's kind of a silly question. I
Oh,
usually,
whoa. You know better than that.
I know.
I always start off with every class that I teach that there's no such thing as a dumb question.
Okay. You guys were focusing on Lightroom and printing out of Lightroom. Why would that be better than Photoshop, or why would I even want to use Photoshop? Only for dodging and burning, or erasing imagery, or I guess
Well,
what
the focus of this series for Jason is Lightroom. Doesn't mean it excludes anything. It's just that this is a Lightroom kind of oriented series. So we decided to keep the conversation limited to Lightroom, because we could be at this all night long.
4 days, in fact, not all night. Yeah, and one of the things I said at the beginning, Louis, is that you can print with Photoshop, you can print with Lightroom, you can print with the Canon software that Eric showed us. At the end of the day, I don't really care. I'll just say from personal experience, just because I, one, not teach it, and two, use it, and three, like the results I get with it. I do a lot of printing even at the lab through Lightroom, but what matters more, I don't know if I should say it that way. Let me back up a second. One of the things that matters a great deal, independent of what program you're using to hit print with, is the driver that you're using for your printer, which it's a really important part of the process. And I could use Lightroom or I could use Photoshop, but I could use settings from one and settings versus the other. And there's some variations from one versus the other. As I said at the beginning, I do have more options with Photoshop than I do with Lightroom. Lightroom is a little bit more concise with its, or I should say, it has more limited parameters with what I can choose. But Adobe's made those choices to do it that way because what we photographers tend to use or kind of fit within the type of settings that they've supplied us. So for my purposes, it's just fine. I'm not suggesting you use Lightroom versus Photoshop. It's like Eric said, this is a Lightroom centric sort of discussion. So, and it's what I happen to use, and it's perfectly appropriate, and it works very well. So if you're already a Lightroom user, and my guess is you are, if you're using this, you could stick with Lightroom without concern, is my 2 cents.
I mean, what I'm doing as a workflow is I do my raw corrections on the Lightroom, and then I'll export it to Photoshop, and then do dodging and burning, erasing, and all that stuff there.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend you do that. I mean, printing aside, you can do dodging and burning all in Lightroom once you get your head wrapped around how those localized correction tools work. And if you go back, and just to get a small taste of that, go back to the recording that we have for the last session on the capabilities of the new AI tools, or I should say the masking panel that is, it's called now, which includes AI tools. You'll get some insight as to how those localized correction tools work, which allows you to do dodging and burning and tonal corrections and changing the direction of light and your image to a great extent, so much so that I almost never use Photoshop anymore. I don't need it. Lightroom is so sophisticated, I don't need it anymore. So, and there's value in staying in Lightroom, in that raw environment I won't go into that right now, but there's value in staying in the raw environment as long as you can. As soon as you get out of there and you rasterize your image and you start playing with stuff in Photoshop, there's a kind of a destructive process that happens. It's not a big destructive process, but it's enough so that we try and avoid it. So stay in Lightroom if you can, and you can print from it too.
Copy. Thank you. And one more quick question. Will I lose any quality in my imagery if I export it to Photoshop and do what I'm used to?
Probably no. No is the answer. But depending on that workflow, there's potential to is how I'll answer that. But you'd have to really kind of mess things up to start degrading it to that degree to you'll notice it. But for the most part, no, not at all. You can rasterize the file, print it out of Photoshop, and it'll be perfectly fine. And let me back up a second and say this. Going back to one of the things Eric said before about how if you're sending stuff to like a lot of these big labs like Bay Photo, and you send them something and they automatically print it as sRGB. For the most part, you're not going to see anything there either. But it just depends on the kind of file that you send, how much or how few colors are in that file, how discerning your eye is. One of the stories I like to tell when talking about printing is a client came to me a few years ago with an image that she took with a Leica S series camera. And for those of you not know about what a Leica S series camera is, it's a pretty fucking nice camera. If you get that with a bunch of its lenses, it's well into the tens of thousands of dollars. And of course, Leica is known for producing cameras that are, the pinnacle of camera engineering, right? And she took a photo with a Leica S series camera and sent it to me. And what she shot was technically dead on. It was sharp. She used, the right shutter speed, the right aperture, the right depth of field. It was a beautiful landscape that she took sitting somewhere in Norway, and sent it to me and said, I want to print an 11 by 14 of this, and asked me, do you think it'll hold up? And it was a really funny question to me, and I absolutely laughed her. And I said, yeah, not only will it hold up at 11 by 14, but you invested all this money in this equipment. You can print stuff that'll hold up amazingly well on billboards. So yeah, it'll hold up just fine. Don't worry about it. But ultimately, my point, see if I can get my brain back on this, was that
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, let me finish my thought. I think I got it now. Is that what you're printing? The perfect print is absolutely in the eye of the beholder, as I said at the very beginning of this. And what one person might see as perfect and beautiful, another person might see as completely different. And that's independent of the quality of the camera you have. It's independent of the quality of the printer that you have and the size of the gamuts that you're using. So to answer your question, Louis, play with it. And if it's coming out looking good, then who cares what you're printing with and how you're printing it. But please add to that, Eric.
I put all this in the category as different strokes for different folks. I know people that do things a certain way, and I go, why would you be doing it that way? That was so like 10 years ago. They didn't learn any differently, and they weren't exposed to anything differently. Now I'm talking to Jason. My workflow is I export from Lightroom. I go into Photoshop. I do my global edits in Lightroom. I do my raw processing, and then I go to Photoshop and I do my final sharpening and my pixel level adjustments. That doesn't mean I'm right, just how I'm used to doing it. I add one layer in Photoshop, my ears start bleeding. I'm not a layers guy. I don't think in 3 dimensions like that, So, but some of the things that Jason has showed me in Lightroom are really exciting, and they're capabilities that weren't there 10 years ago. Our technology keeps on moving forward, and you hear different people talk about different things, and you go, oh, okay, I can use that. I mean, when I first started this conversation, which was like 12 years ago, I shot JPEGs. I didn't shoot RAW. I didn't know anything about color management, and a lot of people gave me help and tips along the way, and it's evolved. And I don't proclaim to know everything, today, I mean, I know what I know, but I don't know everything that's out there. And I'm constantly learning, and I will continue to evolve, and I will continue to adjust my presentations and recordings of classes that I have in perpetuity. If you go to LACP's website, you'll see that there's a lot of different versions of the same class, because every time they come out with a new version of the software, they add new functionality, and I want to put up new information. I spend so much time talking to people about older versions of software or watching older versions of videos with information. I usually, when I start any video class that I teach, I say, look, you're viewing this video that was made on such and such a date. If you're looking at it 10 years from now, I assure you I've made a new video. Watch that one. Right. So, and in fact, you know, so it's a moving target, and we're constantly evolving. I think Barbara has a question.
Yep.
I like these little hands. They're kind of cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Eric and Jason and everyone. I need to print something that's going to be hanging outdoors for about 6 weeks. And I'm wondering if you can suggest a substrate. I'm thinking some kind of canvas. I don't know if I should look out for certain kinds of inks or finishings.
Print on metal.
I would recommend my metal prints. Yeah.
Because metal prints are really indestructible. I mean, you know, I mean, I've got a lot of opinions on prints on metal. I'm very anxious to see what Jason has available.
Yeah, Eric hasn't seen my metal prints yet.
Yeah, but if it's durability you want, print on metal is definitely the way to go. Canvas, paper, all of them, you know, there's going to be susceptible to the elements and humidity and animals and all sorts of things. And, you know, you got that print on metal, it's laminated, it's practically indestructible.
Yeah, let me throw my 2 cents into that one too, because going back to the beginning where I was saying my metals are a bit different. Of course, one of those big differences is dye inks versus aqueous inks. In my experience, even though on the Eric just said that they were laminated, really what a lot of the dye sublimation metals have is a UV coating on them, and they were scratch resistant and they hold up very well outdoors. But one of the issues with those dye inks, even with the UV coatings, is they fade very quickly if they're in any kind of direct sunlight for any time of the day. So the inks that I use, shameless self-promotion here, will fade if also subject to direct sunlight, but they don't fade nearly as fast as the dye inks do. So anyway, ultimately, Eric and I are in agreement. Going for a metal print would be good. So
I think she said it's got to be up for 6 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So then she's thinking, oh my God, a metal print. How big is it going to be?
I haven't decided yet. Maybe a couple of them, 20 by 30.
So costs associated with that, but then again, a canvas might be less. And if it's only 6 weeks, she'll be fine. And if you know, Jason is using a UV cured canvas, it's kind of what that purpose is for.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. What kind of canvas? Because I do want a flexible surface. I'm going to be
so
working with some other
Well, if you
material.
push hard enough, the metal will bend.
Well, what Eric was referring to before, as I was saying, I use solvent ink printers for the canvases, so they're designed for that sort of outdoor durability. So either one would work.
All right.
Hey, John Helfrich has a question.
Yeah.
And Jason, this is your thing, so feel free to cut.
Yeah,
this
well,
off
we'll take one or two more, and then I'll start wrapping things up because
Question about monitor calibration. One of the earlier slides of your presentation, which didn't get shown because you were kind of offline there at that time. Then you kind of went through them quickly, but you were talking about a type of monitor calibration device, but at the bottom of your slide, you said, sorry, Color Monkey Spider. What did you mean by that? Is Color Monkey
good eyes? So I've been, working, with people on color management for a long time. I have the Color Monkey device, which X-Rite put out for a while. That was really not a great device. It didn't calibrate monitors very well. It had no advanced features. You couldn't validate a monitor. I was, in the beginning when it first came out, I spent so much time trying to troubleshoot that device. I just gave up. I couldn't, there was just no capacity or capability for me to really get a professional monitor calibration out of it. So I just stopped carrying it. It was really designed as an inexpensive device to get people into color management. Now, Calibrite has listened to me and other people in the market, and their new Calibrite Display SL device is basically that level of that price point, and it will calibrate a any standard technology monitor. And it will allow you to validate at the end, and it gives you at least access to some of the controls. I've tested it. I'm confident that'll work. So that is your Color Monkey level price product called the Calibrite Display SL. It will not calibrate an Apple XDR display with a mini LED. So it is a little limiting. So but if you have a BenQ monitor and NEC, a standard technology monitor, it's fine. But a lot of people have those Color Monkeys, and when they ask me about it, I'm just like, look, if it works for you, continue to use it. I've had so many customers that, oh, look at my monitor, I calibrated with a Color Monkey. I'm like, it's too bright, it's too contrasting. I could just look at it and tell that it's wrong. Now Spider, I had a lot of problems with Spider in the past. And when a major change happens, Spider tends to get you to have to upgrade the device rather than the software updating for the new technology. So it kind of got you in a mode of having to buy a new device more often. And plus, I never really got them to work. So that line is really there from, it's kind of a bias that I have. And the thing is when I'm a dealer for these things, and when I had a problem with Data Color Spider, which was many years ago, they did nothing to help me. So my opinion at the time, and they've done nothing to contact me or change my opinion, is if they're not going to help me, the company that they want to sell their product, what are they going to do with you? Calibrite has been extremely responsive. Every customer service issue has been handled. I mean, it's just the quality of the product and their service is spectacular. So to me, that's what I carry. That's the horse that I've hitched my wagon to.
That's what I use too.
If you have a Data Color device and it works for you, please use it. There's no reason to get anything new.
All right, let's take time for, well, of course,
Robert
now
had
two
one.
questions popped up. Go ahead, Robert.
Hi. First of all, thanks both of you. This has been a great session. I've learned a lot.
Great.
I do have a more specific question. In Lightroom, under the color management, I use Manage by Printer, and I've read places, stuff like that, that's not the way to do it. But I use profiles in, I still use my paper profiles, but I use the Manage by Printer. Can you explain to me why I shouldn't be doing that? Or
You want this one, Jason? You want me to do it? This is one of my favorite topics.
Well, I don't want to deny you then.
Let's see if Jason agrees with me. So those choices in Photoshop and Lightroom, where it says printer manages color or Photoshop manages color, it's really bad language. It's bad language. It's not really what's happening, right? So what printer manages color does is when you choose the media type setting, let's say it's premium luster, what the driver is going to do is just reach in and choose the generic profile, the generic color profile for premium luster, and print it on whatever paper you're putting in through the printer. The printer doesn't know what paper you put into it. It doesn't know a Canson paper from a Hanamili, from any other brand. It has no idea. When you're printing, you've got to tell that printer everything. You've got to give it complete instructions. It's a big dumb toaster. That's what it is. So when you do printer manages color, it's just giving you a very generic profile, a color profile. And, sometimes it's worthwhile just to get yourself out of trouble. If you're all wrapped up and you don't know what to do, you put on printer manager's color, you can get a good print out of it. Now, Photoshop manager's color is now it activates your profile drop-down menu so you can choose a specific profile. Now, you might have 20, 30, I've got thousands. I've literally got thousands of profiles because I do this for a living. I have custom profiles for various printers on every paper we have and manufacturers' profiles. Got a huge list. Yours may not be that daunting, but what Photoshop manages color is you're simply telling the driver that you are going to be choosing a specific profile for the paper that you're using. And that's the difference. And that is the more professional way to print versus printer manages color.
I have sort of a follow-up on that because I go into page setup and then I set it through there. I manage and I select what paper I'm using and what profile, to go along with that. So that's why I'm confused about the difference.
Well, there's profile and then there's media type. You set the profile in with the program that you're printing out of, and you set the media type with the driver, which also needs to set the media type setting on your printer so they're communicating properly.
See, there's a lot of different screens, right? You got your printer setup screen, you've got the printer screen, you've got all these things. And sometimes if you're not keeping your eye on the ball, you can start getting conflicts. That's why if you have an Epson printer, and Jason disagrees with this a little bit because he prints out of Lightroom, but that's why when you're in the Epson, if you have an Epson printer, you have the Epson software, it's very simple. You don't have like all of these different screens all over the place that you've got to keep your eye on the ball. And if you make a mistake, you got to go back and check. Everything's in one column. It's very simply organized. And you just make your choices and you can save columns of information. So let's say you're printing on Epson Hot Press Bright White. You can set all of that up and save it as a preset. So when you go back to print on it the next time, everything's set and you could just choose that specific selection of parameters, including the size and profile and everything. Same thing on a Canon printer. Canon Professional Print and Layout allows you to do the same thing. And again, printing's not easy. It's not intuitive. It's not easy. If it was, everybody would be doing it really well.
Let me add one more.
Okay, all right.
Do you want to follow up there, Robert?
I did. I mean, because I do set up like a template in Lightroom, for my different papers and different size papers that I use. So I use that, and then, but when
that's different. That's different than what Eric's talking about. What Eric's talking about is configuring settings in the driver and saving those, which are different than the configurations you're setting in Lightroom, which is really just more about layout.
Oh.
And of course the settings in Lightroom. Now let me back up a second. You could save things by way of the template browser and by way of the collections panel. And you're saving two different sets of things in one versus the other. But again, what Eric's talking about is saving the settings that you configure in the driver.
Okay.
We should have a clinic one day. We should just get everybody's questions and have them share their screen and just solve it all.
We could, we should, yeah, we could talk about this for days. Let me add one more thing to that. And Eric's talking about what he's talking about in terms of color profiles, right? Well, there is a type of print that I do where I do exactly what you're suggesting, Robert, and I actually let the printer manage the color or manage the whatever. I'm not going to say color at this point, but Eric, when do you just throw you on the spot here? Sorry about that. When do you think I might do that? When would I not care about the color profile and turn all that off and let the printer manage things instead of me? Any guesses on that?
Black and white.
Black and white. Black and white. And so I don't know if Canon does this. I suspect they do. I haven't used Canon printers in years, but I find, well, let me back up again. uh, Eric hinted to before in his presentation of how when you're printing monochromatic images, it can come out looking a bit green or a bit magenta or shift in one tonal direction versus another tonal direction. Well, the reason why that's happening a lot of times is we're using color profiles, which means that the printer is still using color inks. So one of the ways to stop that from happening and turn those color inks off with Epson printers is to not use a color profile at all, say that the printer is going to manage things. And then in my driver, I have an advanced black and white setting, and I choose that instead. And then all those color inks get turned off. And I get black and white prints without any color shifts, and every time. Phil, did you have a question? I'm gonna wrap it up.
Okay, I was just wondering, Eric, I have a monitor that has a built-in color checker. Every couple of times when you turn it off, it automatically just drops out of the frame and checks the color instead of a color monkey or a spider. Am I missing anything by utilizing the built-in color checker? Or
So do you have an ISO?
yes.
So, one of the great conveniences of ISO monitors is that many of them do have that little thing that comes up and it calibrates the monitor. You're not really missing anything, and it's good that you're using it. But my problem is it only calibrates that part of the monitor that's down here, and when I have a separate device, I can calibrate any monitor, so if it's your only monitor, you're not going to calibrate anything else. There's a great convenience having it built in. But for me, I'd rather, be able to have something, that I can, and it's kind of my life, right? I'm going around and I'm calibrating people's monitors. I could plug this into anybody's computer and calibrate any monitor with it. So you're not missing anything, and there's a great convenience to having it in there. But then you're locked into just calibrating that monitor. So
Yeah. Okay. And thank you.
just use it. And again, it's all about happiness. If it makes you happy, keep on doing it.
Indeed. Let me share my screen real quick to wrap this up. I had similar slides than you, Eric, if I was going to end up talking about this. But you did a great job. So thanks for all of that. Again, much appreciated for you coming and sharing your expertise with us. You're always a deep well of knowledge for all of us to learn from. So thanks again. And I wanted to show this quote as we're wrapping up here. I love it. And whenever I talk about all this geeky, nerdy stuff, it's important to go back to this. Gamma is a term of interest and significance only to the research scientist and the manufacturer. So as we take a drink through our proverbial fire hose here, there's a lot that we talked about, a lot for even me. And how do you guys kind of weave this into your day-to-day lives? If there's one thing and one thing only that I would suggest that you do walking away from this, it would be to calibrate your monitor and start there first in your pursuit of predictability, going from your monitor to your paper. If there's, again, any one place to start, it's to start there. Yes, we can calibrate cameras, we can calibrate printers, we can calibrate papers, we can calibrate everything, and we could use consumer grade equipment, and we can use fancy services like Eric offers us in terms of doing custom profiles. But none of that stuff is going to matter if you're not starting with a good profile on your monitor. So start there first in your, again, pursuit to gain predictability along the way. I find if you do that, and again, if you even simply end up with just using manufacturer supplied profiles to start gaining consistency, that's going to go a long way than not calibrating and not using profiles. It's gonna make just those, if you just did those two things, it's gonna make a world of difference in getting predictability. as you go here. So that's what I'd have to say on that. Of course, if you use a lab, should you need that still? Absolutely. I tell everybody that works with me, if they want to get better, more consistent results, you got to calibrate your monitor. Doesn't matter if you're doing it at home. It doesn't matter if you're doing it at a lab. It's a terribly important thing to do. One of the things I'll follow up with is I'm going to send everybody a copy of a 4-part article series that I wrote a few years ago for a, sad to say, a now defunct magazine, Outdoor Photographer magazine, who I wrote articles for. I was a columnist for them for 15 years, and they just went down the tubes. But I have a copy of that 4-part article series that I titled Modern Printmaking. The article 1 talks about why we should even do this in this day and age where we can just render images on social media and get more social interaction with our image archive than doing printing. Why is it important to print? And Article 1 talks about that. So I encourage everybody to start there. So I'll follow up by sending that out to everybody. And then lastly and finally, before we go, I'll say, please tune in on the 5th of September for the next installment of this Lightroom Classic Live. We do have another very special guest coming next month. His name is David Duchemin. If you do not know who this guy is, you need to go look him up. Most importantly, you need to get on his email list. David is a dear friend of mine. He is the owner of Craft and Vision. And why I say you need to get on his email list is he's an incredibly good teacher of photography. He's written well over, I don't even know how many books he's written, well over a dozen books on creative process and photography. He's been teaching forever, and the company Craft and Vision is a well of resources that one can take advantage of in terms of learning more about your craft. The title of the next Lightroom Classic Live is, we just talked about it before I chimed in, is called Clarity of Thought. So to touch on one of the things that Eric said, which is probably the most important thing, and please correct me or if I'm not stating this how you intended it, Eric, but Eric was talking about what matters most at the end of the day is, yes, whether you're happy, but what matters most at the end of the day has less to do with the equipment that you're using, is whether or not you're creating an image that's meaningful to you, that's impactful to you and to your audience. And you can do that with an iPhone, or you can do that with a Leica S-Series camera. So how does that sound, Eric? First of all,
Perfect.
Thumbs up.
Well said.
So what we're going to be talking about with David, and what we're titling Clarity of Thought, is we're going to walk through David, again, a professional photographer and instructor's Lightroom workflow, and how one of the things that makes impactful images and thus impactful prints has to do with a clarity of thought and vision for what we're photographing and why we're doing it. So I hope you all can tune in on September 5th to hear from David Duchemin on his Lightroom workflow.
Jason,
All
can
right.
you David's link on the email you'll send out with this recording?
You betcha. You betcha. So I'll send that along as well. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for
Thank you,
having me. It was
Jason.
fun. You promised fun, so
Good. Cheers.